Hello.
Hey, how's everybody doing? My name is S.A. Cosby. I'm the author of All the Sinners Bleed, Razor Blade Tears, Blacktop Wasteland, and My Darkest Prayer. I am here with the great honor of speaking to someone I consider a mentor and a friend. You know him, you love him, Mr. Walter Mosley.
Hey, Sean, how you doing, man? And everybody out there, it's so great that you're here. It's really nice. And I want to thank you very
I'm
much,
doing all
Sean, for
right.
doing this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Uh, like I was saying earlier, I look like I just got off in the gas station, but I'm happy to be here. And we are gathered here today to talk about your new book with one of my favorite characters of yours, Mr. Joe King. And it is called Been Wrong So Long It Feels Like Right. And I was wondering if you could give the folks a really brief, as they say in the business, elevator pitch. But I don't know if that is an anachronism now, but give folks a little brief overview of what the story is about.
No, they still have elevators. And this just means that from the first floor to the 12th floor, sell somebody something for a couple of $1 million. And I'd be happy to do that. Um, you know, Joking Oliver, he's the only detective or only person I've ever written about, as a main character who used to be a policeman. And he's a policeman because his father committed a crime, and instead of kind of breaking some of his own rules and staying with his family, he just went to prison. And Joe, Joe's mother died soon after that. And he was living with his grandparents, and he was angry at his father all those years. Uh, and in this story, he has a couple of cases. One of them is about his father, and one of them is a woman who he's found for his old time police dispatcher, who says, "Find this woman, and get you $20,000." He's like, "Oh, well, okay," but then he realizes maybe I should question this a little deeper because this guy's a cop, and I don't trust cops, and so that's a whole story. That's a whole story. And then there's another story where his grandmother, who's 94 and whose boyfriend is the richest man in the world, um, she comes to him and she says, "Look, Joe, 94, they found a tumor between my heart and my lungs. I might die, and I most likely will die, and I need to talk to your father before I pass. And so, will you find him?" He said, "Mom, he's in prison. Go, Grandma, he's in prison. Talk to him there." And she said, "No, he's been out for 9 years. He just didn't tell nobody." And so
Oh, wow.
he has to overcome his anger and hatred at his father, the hot passion, and because of his love of his grandmother, who's the most important person in the world to him, maybe next to his daughter. Um, so he's gonna go, look for his father, even though he's really mad at him. And so it's a book of discoveries, many discoveries up until the very, 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 very end. Uh, First about this woman who he's trying to help escape from the husband who's looking for, then about his father, and who's been blamed for a murder that he probably didn't commit, even after he's been let out of prison, and dealing with the pain in his own heart. I think we got up to the
Yeah.
32nd floor. I don't know. You probably left me something.
We got up to the penthouse, but you got to have the special key to get in. That is an amazing overview. I wanted to start by saying, I like a lot of folks first encountered your work with Easy Rawlins and Mouse and the whole sort of milieu of 1950s, early 60s Watts, and Easy and Joe King are obviously very different characters. The thing I wanted to ask was, what inspired you to create Joe King? Because I've written about a character who is a former FBI guy and a sheriff, and all of a sudden bleed. And that whole book for me was sort of the idea of what would it look like if there were good cops, and Titus Crown, the character in that book, is trying to be a good cop. But with Joe, he became a cop and he got framed and he went to jail and all these things. So I was wondering, what was your, I guess, what was your thinking, sort of crossing that line to create a former police officer?
Well, I mean, it's a really good question. I'm going to say it's a really good question. I mean, my answer is an odd one because it's very true that very often when I'm writing, I'm not thinking. I'm saying, well, I came across Joe Oliver and I said, and I don't even know how. People ask me, how did you come up with him? I don't remember. But I started writing about him, and then I discovered him as I was writing. And I think that if Joe were to answer a question about his world, he would say, well, there really is no good and evil in this. There's good cops and there's bad cops, and you can never make a choice. He says about his grandmother at one point, he says, she believes in good and evil, heaven and hell. I believe that, the worst people I know have the strongest love in their hearts, and the best people I know are cold as you can be. And he's trying to discover a balance between those two things, his grandmother and himself, and also between good and evil. And it's always going to one side or another. He's almost just about to fall off. I've been writing a new book about Joe, and he has his friend Melquarth Frost, and Melquarth, he kills people, and so he's having a conversation with him in the middle of the book, and and Melquarth has done a couple of things for him, got some people out of trouble, and he asked Joe, he says, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" Now, when Mel says that, it means you need somebody murdered or what? And he's and he's you can be sure you can ask him to kill somebody, and unless somebody recorded that conversation, he would never admit it. He could be arrested, he could be thrown into solitary confinement. He is never going to turn on anybody. And so Joe has it's like a button you could push, and every time you pushed it, somewhere would stop breathing. And you had to be really cautious about that. You say, because you kind of you just slip right into it and say, well, if I don't like you, I just push the button, and but the thing is that he's free. He can do whatever he wants to do. And because he's free and he can do whatever he wants, he has to really, really think about everything that he does. And that's Joe's whole nature and character. Now we're way past the top floor.
Now we're on the open air bar at the top of the building. No, I like Joe. I think he fascinates me because there's an old, I think it's George Orwell quote, that we sleep safe in our beds because rough men stand ready to visit violence upon our enemies. And
yeah.
I think Joe sort of encapsulates that in a way different than Easy, where Easy can be violent if he has to. Easy can defend himself. He has Mouse, and I think we all need a friend like Mouse. But Joe, there's a harder edge to Joe. And he's, to me, I've read all the books up to this point. He seems to have more complex moral conflicts. In the last book, he was tasked with trying to clear the name of a white supremacist. And as a black man in America, I was fascinated with that idea of, doing the right thing, even when it's inconvenient. Everybody can do the right thing when it's easy. We can also say that we have these morals of, guilty till you're innocent to proven guilty and so on and so forth. So to test that, let me show you a white supremacist, and can you stand on that moral conviction? With this book, it's even more personal because it's his father. And I was wondering, I think as we both and a lot of people write about fathers and sons and familiar relationships, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Joe and the relationship with his dad and maybe how he sees it, because he seems to be justifying his hatred in many ways.
Well, I think that, he's really angry at his dad for actually good reasons. I mean, first he's blamed for shooting these two guys, which he did do. But, and they're lying because they were shooting at him. The police had told him, they said, look, all you have to do is tell us about the criminal endeavors of these two men that you had to shoot out with, and we'll let you go. And Joe knew that his father was told this, and he said, but he couldn't do it because his father doesn't snitch on anybody ever. That's not going to happen. You can't make me into you. Basically, he's saying to these people, you cowardly whatever, and and Joe is angry at him, but also he's really absorbed all of his strict morality. And also his father's really, Joe's weakness is women and his father's is too. It's just women. And of course, now Joe blames him for the death of his mother, but now he's finding him for the happiness of his grandmother in the last days. It's always a back and forth thing. And, look, he loves his father. Yeah, he hates, you don't like, you can't really hate somebody, in your family and not love them. I mean, that's, you can not care about it. I don't care. Well, he died. Okay, I don't care. But that would have killed Joe. So I think that, and he continually has to deal with this. But I think the whole purpose of this book is for Joe to realize, well, right now we're both men, and as a man, I can talk to you just like you can talk to me. I can make up my mind about what's right and wrong. I can tell you what's right and wrong. And I think that was the place that he had to come to in dealing with his father. His father, who's really like, he's an amazing character. He's everybody, either hates him or respects him. They have a choice.
That's fascinating. I think, like I said, I've written a lot about that sort of father-son dynamic and what it means and how we process it as men. As adults, I should say. And it is interesting because my dad is a character within himself. And so I've been writing about him, I think, since I started writing books. I wanted to touch on another aspect of the book that I think is really interesting. And again, I love the moral. And again, I'll reference Easy again. Easy's moral conflicts seem to be more, no pun intended, black and white. It's either this good thing I'm going to do or I do something bad. Joe's always seemed more complex. He has more in common with Leonard McGill in your other series in that respect. And so I wanted to touch on the I'll call it the marigold problem. And you mentioned that Joe's weakness is women, and this is interesting because this is like in the course of his PI work. This is a pretty easy job. He has to find this young lady and her child. He finds them, and then he has the moral quandary of, should I return her to this person who seems to be maybe violent, possibly, negligent at worst, at best, he's a bore. But you also throw this little wrench in there that, does he really feel that way? Or does he feel that way because he's attracted to her, because he finds her interesting, fascinating? And I was wondering if you could maybe speak on sort of that motivation, because I think we've all felt that, how much of my decisions are being colored by the fact that I think you have pretty eyes. So I was wondering if you could talk on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think that question answers itself, but I'll add a little to it. It's what's interesting about Joe. I said what's interesting about Joe and women is whether he is active, sexually active, let's say, because there's times when he isn't, or he's not. Women still control him his whole life. The person the two people most important to him in his life is his grandmother, who, even though she lives with the richest man in the world, and they get, they have butlers and servants and all these kind of guardians and stuff like that. But when she's finished doing her eating, she says, "Come on, Joe, let's go do the dishes." And Mom, they're all Grandma, there's all kind of servants in here. They said, a man has to do his own dishes. Now, come on, that's 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 one big importance. Like when he was almost when he was arrested, charged with this crime of rape, sent to prison. Um, the only people who still loved him was his grandparents and his daughter. And when he came out,
mm,
his daughter, who was very young, when he went in, said, "Listen,
mm,
I'm there for my dad, no matter what." And the wife hated him, but he.
mm,
So these women control him. I mean, and it's not just sexuality. I think that
mm,
one of the questions, the opposite question, would you ask is when he's talking to Marley or Marigold, um, and she, starts talking about the trouble she has. He wants to help her. That's his job. The sexuality is added to that, but I think that he's more likely to help her, than he is
mm,
likely to help some guy, which is why it's
mm,
such a
mm,
conflict. And in him in the previous book of wanting to help the guy who's a white supremacist. He said, well, this is
mm,
my job, but Easy deals with black and white because that was his world. His world was black and white.
mm,
I mean, good
mm,
and evil, but black and white. He said, "Listen, if you're on one side or the other, you're good, and the other side is evil."
mm,
That's just the
mm,
way that's the way he had to work. Everybody in the Easy books thinks like that, except for Mouse, who he doesn't recognize
mm.
stuff.
I love how Mouse is sometimes the sort of rabbit voice of reason in those books. I really do like that. I respect
But
Mouse for that.
you need it, yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask another question about the book, and this is getting into, I guess, process a little bit. Um, the Joe King, and I've mentioned some of the other series, the Leno and McGill, obviously Easy Rollins. One of my favorite series is the Fearless Jones series. I love Fearless because he reminds me of my cousins and my uncles.
Mm.
There's bad and then there's real bad, and so he reminds me of that. But I wanted to ask, Joe seems to have a lot in common with Leonid, where Leonid is a confirmed socialist. He has a very complicated family dynamic, which always makes me chuckle a little bit. Um, and so I was wondering, like, do you feel like Joe and Leonid are ways for you to speak maybe on sort of our modern sort of society or modern interactions as opposed to Easy and Fearless, where you're sort of talking, in my opinion, you're sort of talking about this, this time period where segregation existed, which was terrible, but also
Mhm.
within that segregation, Black people were able to create sort of this golden age. And so I was wondering if maybe you could comment on the differences as far as like your outlook in the modern characters and the characters in the past.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly it was very rough on Black people, let's say before World War II, actually before the end of World War II. And
Mm,
then things began to change. And you have communities where everybody in that community was Black. The undertaker was
mm,
Black, the doctor was Black, the lawyer
mm,
was Black, the librarian was Black.
mm,
If there was a library, there was a Black library. And
mm,
and white people couldn't even go there. It was against the law for
mm,
white people to go to these places. You know,
mm,
um, and in that, there is a kind of sense of self which is very strong, which
mm,
came under attack after World War II. That sensibility. But of course, you have much more chances to make a good and better life for yourself and your family after then. I
mm,
mean, and and also you have one of the things that I find very interesting, in the modern world, like capitalism is a it's like the only real example of artificial intelligence I know of in the modern world. It makes up its own mind, and it makes up your mind. It tells you how you're going to live and
mm,
where you're going to live and how you're going to dress and what you're going to say and how much you're going to make. All of that stuff. It's going to tell you that. And uh, and and so that didn't used to be true. It used to be true that um, Well, everybody was poor, but white people could go to the trough before black people could. You had to wait to the leavings
Mhm,
from
mhm,
the pig feeding,
mhm.
you know. And but now everything has changed. Now, capitalism doesn't care if you're white or black. It says, listen, I'm going to drain you of every cent you got. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what gender you are,
Mhm.
what your last name is, all of that stuff, right? And that becomes a moment where um, when you're living in that world, which Leonid does, and also Joe, then it's not as simple. Oh well, that's what those white people think, or that's what those black people think. It's never like that anymore, And you have to be you have to be aware of that. Uh, and the world you live in is like you want easy like lives with black people or used to, and he that he knew what that world was. In this world, it's all turmoil, it's all tumult, and I think that so these two characters, Joe and Leonid, are trying to again find a balance. What is the balance? You want your children to to understand life, and you want them to know their history and their culture and all this other stuff. But at the same time, they have to understand their impact on the world, which we didn't have to worry about before 1945. We said we didn't have no impact on the world. My father told me, I said, so Dad, were you afraid when you were in World War II? And he said, no, honey, I wasn't. I wasn't afraid at all. I said, why not? He said, well, because, they told me that it was a war between the Germans and the Americans. And I said, well, it was, Dad. He said, I didn't think I was an American. He said, I was a black man. He said,
Mhm.
I thought if the Germans came up to me and said, where are the Americans? I could point toward the white soldiers and they could go over there. He said, and then they started shooting at me. And that's when I realized I was an American. You know what I'm saying?
Right. I like that. I love that. I get that. I've had conversations back with my mom back in the day about, you know, our reality of who we are. It's like my mom used to say all the time, we're black where we go. We're Americans where they decide that we're Americans. And so I thought that was interesting. So I think I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm going to take some from the list. And this is
Mm-hmm.
just a personal question for me. So I think the thing that I love about all your work, whether it's your series characters or your TV work or your sci-fi stuff or your more adult contemporary novels, is that you have really created a place for yourself where you can write whatever you want. You can write
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want. There's a great George R. R. Martin quote where the king says, "I was never so alive as when I was winning this crown. And so no, I'm never so alive when I was winning this throne and never so dead when I sit upon it." And so it makes me think, was there a moment
Mm-hmm.
in your career where you decided or you realized you had the juice, the jazz, whatever we want to call it, that you could just write whatever you wanted? Like you didn't have to just write crime stories. Or was that something you decided regardless of your wherewithal as far as your career goes?
That's listen, and this is a wonderful question, and also coming from you, who's a wonderful writer. I mean, you can do what you want to do because, well, partly because you do it so well, and partly because people appreciate it so much. But both of those things are together. They're inseparable. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the truth is this: 90% of writers don't make their living off writing. They write.
Mm-hmm.
They make money off of
Mm-hmm.
it, but they don't make their living off
Mm-hmm.
of it. They have to have
Mm-hmm.
another job. They usually do better than other people because they're so well educated and because they have such a mastery of language. So they might do well in life, but it's not because of the books. When you go
Mm-hmm.
to that 90% of writers, the wonderful thing about them is they're writing. Most of them are writing what they want to write. That
Mm-hmm.
it's not an impact about how successful they are because they said, listen, man, I still got to work at the gas station, but I'm doing what I can, and and it's the thing I kind of love about Joe's father. Just, I mean, I don't mean to bring it back to the book, but it does come back
No,
because his
please,
father
please.
has been arrested. He's been put in prison. He didn't do the crime. They were the criminals. He could turn them in, but none of that matters. He says, because that's not my sense of what's right and wrong. My sense of what
Mm-hmm.
right is wrong is that, you find me innocent because I am innocent. That's the innocent part. That's your job. My job
Mm-hmm.
is to do what I love, to do what's meaningful to
Mm-hmm.
me. And I think that, you're
Yeah.
gonna listen. You could take a big chance. All of a sudden, you're gonna write an existentialist novel about a 72-year-old a white school teacher. Uh, you know, some people might not understand that. Uh, but you're doing what you're doing. You're saying, because this is a problem I'm working out with language. And I mean, it's so important. I think if you don't stick to your guns and write what you believe in, which I think you always have, um, you 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 won't be happy with yourself. And the older you get,
Mm-hmm.
the more you miss. I think that I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's and I don't worry about, I don't worry listen, I don't worry about other writers as a rule, but you know if the I think that you need to do what's in your heart, because if you
Yeah.
don't,
That's a
it
great answer to that question. It made
yeah.
me think. I just seen. I went to see the Bob Dylan movie, the most recent one, Complete Unknown, and there's a great scene in there where somebody's asking him to sing "Blowing in the Wind," and he says something to the effect of, if you want to hear that, it's on an album. I'm doing
Hmm.
something different, and I think there's a great conversation, not today, but a great conversation to be had about sort of the reality of chasing and catching the brass ring, and it's sort of like the dog that chases the car. Once you catch it, what do you do with it? Now what's my plan? And so I think that's an interesting sort of
Yeah.
conceit. And I take a lot of inspiration from you and your career as far as being able to do the things that you want to do. So I think I'm gonna pop in here and take some of these questions now. So there's a couple of interesting ones. So I am going to start with one from and forgive me if I butcher your name, Bretta Menifee. And she says, I don't believe I've heard or have had any explanation of why some of your character locations are in the Fifth Ward. Do you have a personal relationship with Houston at all? And I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to let you answer it.
uh, my father, his mother died when he was 7. His father, who was a lumberjack, went off and did all that lumberjacking work. And one day he went out and he never came back. Probably died, out there working in that dangerous profession. My father was 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He ran away from home, and that was in New Iberia, Louisiana. And an 8-year-old kid, jumped into a boxcar filled with black men and made his way to Fifth Ward, Houston, Texas, which is where his mother's father lived. He went there and he just walked around Fifth Ward for days and days and days until he found his grandfather, who said, listen, you can sleep on the porch, but you got to feed yourself. That that
Mm-hmm.
was that was love. It was hard love, but that was like, I'm gonna let you sleep on the porch. I'm gonna let anybody else sleep on my porch, but I ain't gonna feed you. Now,
Mm-hmm.
my father was, grew into manhood in the Fifth Ward. And here's how he used to explain this to me. And he kind of seemed happy when he would explain it to me. He said, Walter, the police went home on Friday night and came back on Sunday morning to count the bodies. It was the toughest place you can imagine. George Foreman was raised in the Fifth Ward, and when the police came after him, he would jump under a house and hide there, like in the garbage, trying to get away from them because it was so hard. And this was a Texas thing for black people. Fifth Ward, Houston, Texas was the hard. And if you could make it in Fifth Ward, for Sinatra, if I could make it here, I can make it anywhere. He couldn't make it in Fifth Ward.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's the answer to that
Mm-hmm.
question.
That's a great. That's a great story. I knew the answer, but I thought it'd be cool to sort of share it. Let's see. We have another question here. I think this is a good one. This is from Jessica DeLilio, and she says, "What is the best advice you've ever received, right, about writing or life? What's the
About
best
writing
advice
or
you've ever
what?
received? I'm sorry. What's the best advice you've ever received about writing or life in general? That was her question.
All right, I have a good answer to that. I had a close friend, a mentor in writing, a guy named Frederick Tutton. He used to teach at City College in New York, and this was the very beginning of me, starting to write. I might have gotten a short story or two published. I don't know. And uh, Frederick and I were just talking about it one day, and I was saying, "Well, I'm trying to do this, and well, this is going to be great, and I wrote this thing, but I don't know, And Frederick said,
Hmm.
"Walter, whatever you think, the one thing you have to remember, this is the best time of your life. When you've been
Mm.
you're writing. I did a couple of writing series that I like, man, I would, get writers and get other people, get money, and just do that. I would do readings. I would go out with friends. We would do readings. I studied poetry because I knew that if you knew how to write poetry, then you would know how to write fiction, because prose has to be alive. It can't just be, well, then he walked into the room and then he took out the gun. you know it can't be like that.
Yeah.
So when he said that, this is the best moment of your life, I realized that if I recognized that, I could extend that moment, that
Mm.
everything I did. And it goes back to your previous question. One of the things is writing what I want to write. This is who I am. This
Hmm.
is not what you tell me. Because a lot of people said, listen, you can only be a mystery writer because that's the only way you're going to make money. And I said, well, prove it to me. So, well, we're not going
Hmm.
to buy your other books. And I said, well, okay, fine. That's not enough proof. I'm gonna keep on writing. You know. And because I mean, yeah, write every day, read the great writers. Uh, I don't know if write what you know, but at least write what you feel or believe. But not all of that is secondary to, really celebrating yourself as what you're doing.
That's a great answer. I agree with that 100%. I think somebody gave me some advice one time about writing, and they said, you're the only one that can tell the story that you're trying to tell because nobody else has
Mhm.
lived your life. And I definitely 100% agree with it. I tell people that all the time. There's really no rules to writing, in my opinion. You write whatever you want.
Mhm.
Somerset mom said there's only three rules of writing. If the first one is nobody knows the other two. And so I definitely think writing what you want, writing what you feel like writing, but also to what Mr. Frederick said, it really is. I not to make this about me, but last year I got to go to France, and I was sitting at a cafe down the street from Ernest Hemingway's old place where he wrote Movable Feast, where he really did his buddy F. Scott wrong in that. But anyway, and I'm sitting there, and I'm wearing my old school Chuck Taylors, and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking. I'm a big old country boy from Virginia, and here I am in France at a literary festival being celebrated. And writing is the best job in the world. It really is.
Mhm.
That's my opinion. So I concur with what Mr. Frederick said. It really is the best time of
Yeah.
your life. I'm going to ask another question here from the list, and I'm going to ask it the way she wrote it. This person wrote it, but I'm going to sort of edit it a little bit. And she says, do all of your lead characters possess elements of you, or are they completely isolated from you? And at what point do they take take on a life of their own? And that's from Miss Claudia Decatur Brown. And I just want to add to that. I think I know the answer to that, but I wanted to say, do you feel like all of your characters have pieces of you, and but also how much of that is a kind of percentage? Because I know the characters have to live on their own; they have to be their own sort of creation. So I guess I actually probably made that question more complicated. So let me just back off and let you answer
No,
it.
listen, that's not you. That's great. I mean, of course, I'm writing, right? And so the writing is coming from me. A lot of that is unconscious stuff. A lot of things that people do or do again and again. It's I don't realize it for a long time. Um, but in a way, you give birth to these characters, and if you give birth to something, then it is itself alive. I was, lately, Fearless Jones has been in the Easy Rollins novels. They have, Easy hires Fearless because he's tough and he's honest,
Mhm.
and he said,
Mhm.
these are the things that are most important, And but I was writing this one, and these three guys were going to kill Easy, and they were on him, but Fearless came up from behind and he put each one of them down. Blam, blam, blam. Because he's just tough. And I know where that came from. I know there was a kid who went to my high school who was like that. He was a little skinny guy, but shit, he could hit hard. And but the thing was is that Easy says, man, how'd you do that? How'd you take on them three guys at once? He said, well, when I was a youngster, my uncle would take me down, south of, between Houston and Galveston, and we'd go out in the fields just with a knife, just with a bowie knife. We'd go out there with a bowie knife, and you just sit and you wait until the wild boars that are out there would come at you. And he said, and when they come at you, when you saw him, he said, you had to not only kill them, but you had to cut their throat immediately. If you didn't, whether they lost or not, you were going to die. And I I wrote that, and then I read it, and I went, wow. So this is why Fearless is the way he is. It wasn't me. It was in telling that story and opening up and being able to tell that story, because I never had that experience and I wouldn't do it either. I said, no, Uncle, let's go get some ice cream, but anyway, so I hope that answers the question.
No, it did. I get that. I understand it because people, just as a side note, people ask me all the time about my characters, and they're all these tough guys, and you're a tough guy. And I like to say that I think I like to think I'm a tough guy, but I think if you're real tough people, understand that sometimes you got to take a beating, and I've taken a beating before. So, so I think I sort of try to imbue my characters with that. That's a real quick anecdote, but I'll share it because it is kind of funny. So I grew up. I lived with my grandmother and my mom and my uncles. My mom had a bunch of brothers, and they were really tough guys. They were tough dudes. Like my uncles were. They didn't take no wooden nickels, and they inspired me to be that way growing up. And I was 16 years old, and I had won all my high school fist fights up to that point. And there was a gentleman, I'm not gonna say his name because he's still a friend of mine to this day. But you don't know anybody as well as you know somebody that you fought. And he told me that he did not want me to sit next to a girl at lunch that he liked and I liked as well. So, we almost like two French generals, we decided to have a duel at the bus stop. And I was pretty confident in myself because, like I said, I hadn't lost a fight at that point. And I'll never forget, as long as I live, I hit him as hard as I've ever hit anybody in my whole life. I mean, my dad taught me how to fight. I planted my feet, swiveled my hips, clocked him as hard as I could. And he shook his head like a bull. And he's like, "Whoa, that's the best you got?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's pretty much it right there. That's my top repertoire." And the beating commenced. And I remember I was looking around like, where are the teachers? Somebody break this up for the love of God. So I always give my I always give my characters a little bit of that fear because there's always somebody tougher. So anyway, that was a great answer to that question. Let me ask you another question here. Let's see. Let's see. Again, I'm going to edit this question a little bit. This is from Michael Chan. He's basically asking, how much research do you do for novels? How much of the research it goes into the novel? And again, I kind of know the answer to this, but if you wanted to speak on that a little bit, by all means, please do.
I was actually being interviewed yesterday, and the fellow like interviewing me, black guy from Texas, and he was saying that a lot of great many of the black men he knows who read say, well, I only read nonfiction because I only like reading truth. That's not really why. The reason why you'll find a lot of black men only read nonfiction is because they find themselves misrepresented in all other kinds of writing. Also, that
Hmm.
a lot
Hmm.
misrepresented in nonfiction, but they don't read those. Um, and 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 my response to that was, well, that's okay. So I said, but almost all nonfiction is untrue, and almost all fiction is true, because fiction, you're speaking from your heart, your imagination, all of your experiences, but blended into some kind of new thing. Nonfiction, let's say if you were going to write about, you always give this thing, you have a right wing writer and you have a left wing writer, both biographers, and you say, well, I want you both to write books about Ronald Reagan. They're going to be very different books. I don't care how many details are the same. The books are going to be different. That's to begin with. That people come from their own point of view when they're writing nonfiction, which necessarily makes it a lie. The other thing is, in order to say everything about a person, you probably have to write 150,000 words or 150,000 pages. But you can only write 400 pages. So that 99.9% that you left out, how can you be telling the truth if you left out 99% of what you're talking about? And you know, in fiction, that's not true. I know that doesn't sound like I'm answering the question, but I am. Because the thing is that I research isn't why I write. You know, I'm not trying to tell you the truth about, you know, how tall the Eiffel Tower is or how deep the Atlantic Ocean is. I'm
Exactly.
not telling that story. I'm telling a whole completely different story, you know, about Mouse, Jackson Blue. You know, I'm talking about um and what I do, so I write a whole book, I write the whole thing all the way to the end, and then I read it very closely, and everything that I claim to be true, I look at it and I say, is it true or not? And if I don't know, I look it up. Last point about that. I was doing a reading once about 25 years ago, and a guy was there, and he said, "Mr. Mosley," after it was over, he goes, "Mr. Mosley, you wrote about that house on Denker Street, you know, the house, the blue house where Mouse was." And I said, "Yes, yeah, I remember I wrote that." And he said, "I was born in that house." And I, I said, "Okay, fine. Now, I know I made up that house, but that doesn't mean he wasn't born there. You know what I'm saying? That
Yeah.
the reality of the fiction isn't the detail of the house. It's what the reader makes of it and what they make it into, you know. And, you
That's a
know,
great answer to that question. That's a great
I,
answer. I get that question a lot as well. I had a guy ask me about Blacktop Wasteland. He said, "Well, how much research did you do for the car scenes and the car chase scenes and all that?" And you know, I used to give a very professional answer. You know, well, you know, I read Popular Mechanics and I got the specifications for the '72 Maverick. But the reality of the situation, and I tell the truth now, is I had uncles and cousins that race cars. I used to sneak out at 15 and go up the road, as we said, go up the road a piece and jump in my cousin's car. And I had a cousin, he's no longer with us. His famous words when we raced, if you were the passenger, was, "Don't you get scared until I get scared." And I was always say, like, I am terrified because we're doing 105 in the dark. And so I think, you know, I have a tattoo on my arm that says, "Writers tell lies to find the truth." And I agree with what you said. I think fiction is the most honest sort of interaction that we have in the arts, because everything that comes through a fiction book comes through me, and it's filtered through the prism, or you or any other great fiction writer. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think we're almost out of time. I'm going to ask one more question from the list, and then we'll invite the we'll end the program here. I'm going to ask this, but if you don't feel comfortable answering it because it might entail a spoiler, that's fine.
okay.
But this is from Brittany Thomas, and she wants to know, what was the hardest scene to write in Been Wrong So Long It Feels Like Right. And I know that's sort of a question that's difficult to answer off the top of your head, but if you want to just give me a couple examples, or what was the most difficult thing about writing the book, if you want to do it that way as well.
Huh. You know, I mean, that's that thing, you know, I love writing so much, you know, that, you know, when it's hard, it's better, but well, listen, I'll say this, but I won't talk about the scene. There's a final scene of the book, and it's where the whole book was leading, but you never knew it, which is something I
Mm,
haven't done. It's a thing that usually is frowned upon in fiction. If something happens,
mm.
you have to give me some understanding of what it is, and I do give an understanding of what it is, but it's so unexpected. It is as if I did not. When
Mm.
you can come to the absolute end and make when you're in that car doing that race and you're just about to come to the cliff, and you make a hard left turn, and 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 the harder that turn, the more likely you are to win that race. uh
Mm.
that's that's what I did. So I think it's the last scene. Writing the scene itself wasn't hard, but placing it, because I mean
Mm.
there's so many things in fiction. I can write anything, but can I
Mm.
put it in the right place and
Mm.
have it make sense? And I didn't know that it
Mm.
was or wasn't until after until after a lot of people had read it. So
That's a I love that. Where's the right place to put that scene?
hmm
I love that. I guess we're gonna end on that. That's a great place to end. I want to take time to thank Barnes and Noble for having us or having me talk with my friend, the great Walter Mosley. I'm S.A. Cosby. I have a book coming out in June called King of Ashes, June 10th. So please be on the lookout for that. Been Wrong So Long, It Feels Like Right is out now. Please go and purchase it. Also, if you purchased signed copies, you will get them 8 to 10 business days after this event, which basically will be the day after Valentine's Day. So hopefully your relationship is still strong. You can enjoy the book. Um, I want to thank Barnes and Noble for having us. I want to thank everyone in the audience for being here, and I really want to thank my friend Walter Mosley. And it's one of those things that I'm very proud to say that we're friends. I was thinking about this the other day that whenever we see each other, it always feels like we just finished it. The conversation doesn't feel like it ended. We feel like we're just picking it back up. So for that, I thank you. So
and I thank you too. It's great to be talking to you. So it's great. I look forward. Maybe
all
I'll see
right,
you in New Orleans.
yeah, we'll definitely pick that conversation up and a drink when we're in New Orleans.
All right.
So everyone, thank you so much. Everyone have a great day. Thank you for being here. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.